Well, hey everyone, and welcome back. This video is going to be about geologic history, particularly breaking down some of the events that occurred in certain divisions, particularly to this video, 2 eons and quite a few periods that follow. Now, to keep this within a reasonable length, I've divided up. I'll be doing a video later that continues this, but this video is going to be focused on everything before the Mesozoic era, which goes up to the Permian period at the end of the Paleozoic era. So with that said, let's jump right into it. Now, we're going to start with things that are Precambrian, meaning before the big explosion of life, right? So the first thing that we have is the Archean Eon. Actually, I think it's Archean. I'd have to check myself on that. Yeah, I think that's correct. It's E then A. Unfortunately, I don't have the spelling off the top of my head, but the Archean Eon, which, if you recall from my last video, I discussed how the geologic time is divided up based on how much interesting stuff occurs during certain divisions. Well, since this was a very long time ago, about 4 billion years ago, the formation of the Earth, to 2.5 billion years ago. That's a pretty long period of time, and it's because not a whole lot happened during this entire eon of time. However, that's not to say that nothing interesting happened, and we do have a few cool events going on, such as the formation of the crust. So the crust forms during this period, or this eon, this division of time. We have our first rock records. We have our first bacteria, single-celled organisms. The atmosphere begins to form. And finally, we have our first evidence of what is called blue-green algae, which is pretty interesting. Hopefully you know algae as the anaerobic organisms that you would see in like ponds or something. Particularly large amounts of eutrophication has been occurring, but we have evidence of what's called blue-green algae, which, for the sake of this video, we'll just say that's evidence of early life. I'd encourage you to do more research on blue-green algae because it is pretty interesting. Maybe I'll do a future video on it, but to keep things relatively short, we'll just move on. So the Archean Eon, the big takeaway, we have the formations of things like the crust and the atmosphere that allow for our first forms of life, notably bacteria and other single-celled organisms. Okay, so that's the Archean Eon in a nutshell. Oh, where'd I put my eraser? Give me a sec. So that's the Archean Eon in a nutshell. And as you can guess from the name, that means old, right? And directly following that, we have the Proterozoic Eon. Proterozoic. Zoic, not zoic. And this, once again, is an eon. So, in general, you know, eons are going to be longer than periods or epochs. So, once again, this is where the last one ended, about 2.5 billion years ago, through 540 million years ago. So once again, relatively long, which gives you a general idea of how much interesting stuff is going on here. So there's really not much, not too much going on. However, we do have what's called Ediacaran, I think. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Actually, rocks are generally my strong suit, not fossils. But we have our first fossil evidence of what's called Ediacaran fauna, which I believe is stem and root-based, similar to modern-day plants. That kind of, I'll write this little note. So our first plants that we would say are similar to modern-day ones. To modern Ediacaran fauna.